This is IBM Museum. I've just had the last of the sunlight that was kind of playing havoc across my recording area has gone down. We're not going to have that interfere with this video. And I still have the NCR 3220 up on the bench here. And I've still got it open for looking a little bit at the internals, even answering some comments that I've had come across. And we're going to look, besides looking at the internals of the hardware a little bit deeper, some of the questions raised with the last video, I'm going to also be showing some of the software to the Undocumented PC book. I've covered that before and given the ISBNs of that. And we also be looking at the reference diskette contents in this case for this system. And it's going to be a little bit later video before I go through and run make a reference diskette for the NCR 30, I think it was a 3334 that I had that resembles like the Model 50 and has the 386SX in there. But I wanted to show a little bit more of that reference diskette creation process with that. And I'm still waiting on some parts for a system to do that we can have up here as well, to go through a little bit of that process. And I'm sure the Dallas module will actually work in that one. So we'll go through and check that out. Let me get turned around here. I may go off screen. I just have to kind of see and look over a few things on the internals here, and then we'll go through. I've even got a screen capture set up to where we'll go full screen with that video video capture, because that's a little bit more needed in the instance of the UNPC utilities, the software that's on that disk. Okay, and one question aspect with this, with the previous video, was the aspect of the fan that I showed below this brace, just that little thin thing, and it does move a little bit of air around the system, but that being the only fan that's on the system. Now, I did have a comment back that there's a drive or a Molex power connector here, 5 and 12 volts. It's tucked away in here for some odd reason, just being away. And I had the feedback that would be likely running a fan that would be in this area. And indeed, these columns that are behind this adapter support bracket, they actually have the ends here, and it looks like about the same sized fan that would be here, and that I think those are like 40 millimeters. They're pretty small, and this one still does not have a whole bunch of length to it. That it would be a similar width of fan, but maybe powered from that drive supply for sitting back here, and there are the 4 columns to pull that out. Now, the question is primarily raised because of this overdrive CPU being on there without any fan to that heat sink. I did get further feedback from that fan about the large integrated circuit that we did see, the chip that's below that, and it was pondered that may be for the cooling of that, because it sits almost just right over the top of that. And this is one of my little tools or toys, as it were, an infrared thermometer. And I wanted to go through, I've actually been running the system quite a long time. I've probably been running it for close to about a half hour. Now, electronics are going to go through and they're going to reach their operating temperature very, very quickly with the constant variables like airflow through the system and cooling. Those are not going to very much for these older styles of the 486. More modern CPUs, they go through and of course they clock down depending on load, and they can go through and they're a lot more energy efficient as well as power efficient, and that translates over to a little bit of the heat that those throw off as well. Now, I measured this overdrive CPU, and we just put the little bead on there of just around that chip and have it play around a little bit of the fins. I don't really know how much heat is necessarily transferred to the top of that plate, being that sits on the fins. Mostly it's going to be in the fins that are on the sides there. And that's about the temperature I was getting. I was getting areas around the fans of a temperature around 135 at the very maximum Fahrenheit. And that coincidentally is there's a little bit higher. There's about 137 or so. But 135 degrees Fahrenheit is supposed to be, and that's 85 degrees Celsius, is supposed to be the normal operating temperature of a 486 CPU. And so going through that large scale integration chip, that's below 90 degrees, heat on the top of it, and it doesn't even have a heat sink on it. Going through a lot of these other chips, it just looks like a normal operating temperature. Some are getting close to about 100 degrees, but most are around that 90 degrees. Have Sims in there that are getting above 105. I mean, that's not quite enough to scorch your fingers, although touching the top of the overdrive processor is probably good and warm. I've gone through and I've checked the components. That's 80 degrees. And the ambient air temperature here is probably along the lines of 70 or 80 degrees in the space I'm in right now. That's 62, 63, if it can be seen for the alignment. And so that's showing the ambient temperature, of the around the table, even less than 60 degrees. And of course, I did go through, it's kind of an upside down view for showing this, but going through on that power supply, and I was seeing highest temperatures in there of going through 76, 77 degrees inside that power supply. And that's been running for a half hour. I just thought I wanted to look around with this nice little tool of checking the temperatures inside. Whenever you have overheating issues and things like that, it's always good to kind of check. I've had this for a few months, and I intend on later CPUs, I have a few that I have arranged that I might go through and just try and swap out because, and we'll see a later reading on this CPU, and this is supposed to be an Overdrive DX4 100 CPU, and then I have a Blue Lightning, and this is a clock doubled internally, and it really interested me for all that this does not have any form of a heat sink to it. It's not quite, that's just a form of plastic. Doesn't feel necessarily ceramic or anything like that. I don't know necessarily the composition of that chip. the package it's in. But I want to see this. I've never really checked that temperature of this one. This would be, effectively a less powerful CPU than that overdrive processor in there. These are both based on the Kingston chips. It'd be like a KX, the 5X86 133, and that's got a little heat sink on it. It doesn't have the and did I say it's based on the AMD CPU, the 5X86? Now there's a Kingston turbo chip variety that has a fan. That typically is, that fan is not all the best quality, and those things can quit, especially if they're in a lot of operation. And I'm looking at that mainly for a lower profile than the CPU, and plus these are clock quadrupled. So it 33 megahertz externally and 133 megahertz internally on these chips. That AMD DX4 and then this is the same sort of, and I've actually got this on an anti-static block. And this is about the same profile as the overdrive CPU that's in there. And mainly that concept of that overdrive CPU being in there also gave another issue, as it were, and that is we can go through and remove this bracket on the lower microchannel slot, and that's the AVE slot, typically known as this microchannel slot that 8514/A adapter fits in. Now, this is a double-decker car. It's got the additional memory, the VRAM on there as well. Different way of doing things. But really, for all that, I can say this is a first world issue. I'm not going to, of course, put this thing all the way in, but coming up to here, that overdrive CPU is just too tall there for a full-length adapter to go in that, especially like an AVE adapter that would be required to go into that particular slot if you want to use it. So that is an aspect that I may deal with, like I say, to go with the thought of these. And I'm trying to think what this, but I think this is the Evergreen upgrade. And I have a few of these actually as well. And it's got a few jumper settings on there for the clock multiplying and probably internal cache enabling and things like that. Voltage regulation. But these are nice enough that it's low enough from profile and worth swapping in there just to kind of see what it does. Now I'm going to switch to the screen capture in just a moment here. I'll get in front of the computer again to kind of go through, and that is going to take a lengthy period of time for the UNPC programs to run to show everything and just to kind of scroll through that. So ultimately that stuff can be captured on video. But and by UNPC, I'm meaning that undocumented PC. This is the diskette with the programs. These are that first edition and the second edition that I have here. Content's very close to being the same, and about all the same thickness and everything else. And I have my first edition is autographed by Frank. And before anybody asks, no, I'm not going to release the the programs that are included on this diskette. I mean, that's copyright information that's still put through with his book. He's collecting that, and without any notification from him to assure me that I would possibly be released from doing anything like that, I'm just not going to do it. And so that's going to be what we're going to use the Skycam for today. I'm going to go through, and the first thing we'll look at is the reference diskette contents. I'll put that diskette in the drive, and we'll look through that on screen. And so let me get set up for that. Okay, and this machine through the AutoExec it's set to boot into Windows. Now the interesting thing on that clock chip that I struggled so much with in that angle, interesting enough, the system rolls over the date correctly. But the really odd thing is, and this may be just a little bit with the initialization of how when it detects that battery is a too low a voltage, the clock effectively starts from when the machine was powered on, and so we can have to where the date is correct, the time, and this will be interesting to see. So I've had the system on for more than an hour, as it is at this point, being that it thinks it's been an hour since it was started. And I've gone through, and of course it launched Windows, and I went through, and I've gotten back to the DOS prompt, cleared the screen to go through for this video. Let me get back on. It'd be good for me to get back on screen too, wouldn't it? Okay, there we go. Yeah, so I can be visible in my IBM swag. I need to get more of this stuff in, and I can go through and link to where this official IBM swag comes from. T-shirts, even for the very large sizes, under $20 USD, and the hats under $10 USD. So what we'll do, I'm going to go through and just do a directory of A/pause, because we have that. And you'll see the screen adjust a little bit for this thing. And I just want to kind of basically scroll through and show, and I haven't looked at depth and compared what these adapter description files would be for. Some of it looks like it's SCSI, but a little bit more conventional AutoExec.bat and a setup.exe. This could necessarily, be on other media other than a diskette drive. The thought is, if you're able to get booted to the hard drive, which this model may allow, even not necessarily being configured, that you could go through there and have this the stuff in a particular directory that you ran from the command line on the hard drive. And thankfully, we haven't seen that diskette drive fail in any sense. It might be worth looking over some of these files at a later point. And there's not much more. When I just press the space bar to have that config.sys in there as well. So that is the contents of the reference diskette. And as I say, on the other system, I'll be showing the going through and creating that reference diskette, what files are kind of compressed together, the way to go through. There's instructions that are included in that of how to go through and extract that image. And it actually looks like it's, when you get an image, it's actually the WinImage compatible. So you can work with other means to get that image onto a diskette, not necessarily the NCR program that does it. It's called CopyDisk from NCR. So let's get further on. Like I say, the UNPC or undocumented PC programs are going to take a little bit of while to go through, so we best get started on that. And I've put all those files from that diskette into a particular directory. That's typically the way that's not really necessarily in a install program, but just to give a brief overview. And there's actually places in the graphical representation that you can see all the files that are included, and nice little layout of how Frank has this set up, and even gold standard README in there, and source files for what he's got on the disk. You can run those from the command line as well, in addition to the okay, and just allowing, going through and scrolling through that, just allowing people to see a little bit of those contents. And we're going to go through and do the graphical view of that as well. And some very nice little utilities. And that is by starting the main graphical interface. And I thought that this had mouse support at one time, but I've tried loading the mouse driver and it just doesn't. I don't ever get a pointer on the screen. We'll let the screen stabilize here a little bit. And this is through a video capture that's, and it has to get it down to even an S-video level before going through and capturing it again. And so it's just not the highest quality, but it gives us a good indication. We'll see that just that background, the scan traces and stuff like that that are visible that way. Now, from the main menu and at the very top is the I/O port viewer. I've actually used this before. It's kind of a handy device to see sometimes, and that's going through. It gives a submenu of viewing I/O ports. Okay, and that just shows all these I/O ports on the system that are going through and turning over. And of course, there are some values in here, and so cursor keys control up and down. And then you can also do the page down and page up for the full page views. Now, some of these areas you'll see that are marked excluded. There's a legend for that. You want to exclude some ports because, you can even effectively go through and crash the system by reading certain areas. There's even the thought of the video display, what's putting on big block of area that is excluded from those I/O ports. And just some of the I/O ports and of all the different devices on the system, what they're doing at particular times. And even some identifiers here of the ESIA area, and that's likely not used in this instance, but going through and it's just I think it'll scroll through whatever until whatever upper limit, but we won't see any further detail with that. And this might be handy to run on an ESI system at some point too. And IBM made ESIA. That's a big misconception that people think they threw behind microchannel entirely. Well, the PC servers, a lot of them, they did have the microchannel and PCI shared buses, but or a mixed bus type machine, but they also had ESIA and PCI PC server systems as well. And we've actually even going through, stepping through at the top, even goes through at the that upper range of what I/O ports would be as well. So wrapped around basically. And this is where you set the port exclusions. I think at one point there was a particular device I had to go through and exclude some ports. On this system, it looks like it's running fine, but you would go through and just with the you have the blinking cursor there to go through and select whichever particular port and be able to exclude or just to toggle the state of that. The write ports after read, the read ports twice. About the I/O viewer, I don't want to step into too many of these, and I just don't want to push things and have the system crash on me. And this is the area that it would be most likely with the undocumented PC for it to crash. And so about the I/O viewer, and it tells how to go through and exclude ports or include, or the toggle between low and high bytes, and then pressing a key just to get back to the menu. And of course you can do escape to get back to the previous menu or that return to main page. System information. Okay, the CPU information. And it reads some of this from a file, but look how elaborate this stuff is. Of the CPU class, tells you the FPUs inside the CPU instruction set, CPU vendor of Intel, internal CPU speed. Now this marks as 60 megahertz, and this has been generally accurate in the past. And so I have to kind of see why it's saying that is 60 megahertz. That might be worth examining with the other CPUs just to see if it's tracking properly or what's going on. And we get to see details like the prefetch queue size of 32 bytes. It's not really explain what elements compose that space or the size of that. CPU ID, vendor string of genuine Intel. We'll get into a little bit of that aspect. This supports the so-called on-the-fly CPU ID with the vendor string included. And it's just it's a copyright of date of 1992 or later on that CPU that made Intel start to put that on-the-fly CPU ID. Other info, stepping 0, model 8, family 4, max reg 1. I don't know what the max reg means. And normally this looks like the inverse. It'd be, okay. So reading this backwards, this would be CPU ID, effectively the raw CPU ID of 1480. And the 1 means an additional, or that overdrive CPU is what that typically means. An actual overdrive processor. Normally in other arrangements, if you just put in the DX 66 Blue Lightning chip, that would just show as a, and probably for IBM it'd show an A, but that would be a 0 with other Intel, like a clock doubler CPU. Now it'll be interesting because the overdrive processor does have an extra pin, and that's actually just a key pin. That's just for the to make sure you have it in an that detects that CPU in an overdrive socket, and some of the systems need that pin present to actually disable the base CPU, and that may be a requirement with this system that I have to address. And I think the Trinity upgrade, and that being the same profile as what I'm replacing anyway, just a faster CPU. Clock multiplies a little bit faster inside. Does have that overdrive pin. The other processors that I had laid out there do not. They don't have that overdrive pin, although there are other ways, and in some instances, you have a CPU in the socket and it knows to disable the main processor. But it's just not any hard and fast rules. We may need to check that out later on. The 8 is typically just mean a DX4 CPU, and that's a normal indication of the so-called write back L1 cache mode. It's not anything identified as a 9 that has that L1 cache set in the write through mode or anything like that. And stepping of 0, it's not actually really a stepping value, is coupled with the 8, meaning that that's a 46 DX4 processor from Intel for that encoding. And the AMD chips for that level, I mean, they will give different encodings that way, as well as the IBM CPU as well. And so then it has all the features, the bits that are set there. People have been undoubtedly reading on as I go through and go through my dialogue of talking. And it doesn't have much information other than that, just that screen full. And it tells you the internal cache is enabled. Oh, it says enabled with write through. So, and the current CPU mode being as real, internal cache size of 16 KB. And it's very elaborate, the program's on here, and how he goes through and determines the size of that prefetch queue of the internal L1 cache just by timings of seeing how fast the CPU is able to get that data when that speed kind of drops off when you give it a little bit bigger block of data. And those are not hard-coded values. These are real-time from the CPU. So it does give very useful information. BIOS data. Okay. And it's interesting here because I thought when we looked at the back of this unit, it had a serial. I thought it had at least one serial port. I knew it had a parallel, knew it had the SCSI port, but this is marking that it doesn't have a serial port. And it might be even good if that serial port is maybe gone out or not functional or something else, or maybe takes going through a little bit of the setup to enable that and set the address of that. And we may have to look at that reference disk a little bit more sometime. But if I need to add a serial port for any functionality, I can do that through an adapter. And it does identify the parallel port there, that extended BIOS data area segment, and then equipment flags. See number of serial ports detected, and it's got 011 on that. Some reason. I don't know. It might be misidentifying the serial ports the way that they're set up. And there's, I can scan that a little bit deeper sometime. Diskette drives. video adapter type. I'm just going through and pressing the cursor keys to go down, scroll through. Motherboard mouse support. Math coprocessor installed. Boot diskette drive present. Manufacturing test. A memory size. And this is a lot of that detail that's in that. It shows the memory address, basically that block where that information is stored. And I think that there is quite a bit. I'm just going to go through and keep scrolling through. And if anybody wants to pause the video and look at particular things a little bit closer, they can. Excellent little utility. Okay, and I'll have to see when we get to, I don't know how far this goes. Yeah, and even has it labeled as print screen to print. And I forget how much it prints. If it just does a relative screen full, and even to the mechanism, what that does. If it just throws that data to the printer port, it'd be nice if it actually threw it to a file, and that's what I intend for in the System Information Tool, my version of it, going through and being able to record all this detail, kind of a fingerprint of the system to a file. Okay, and it's finally chirping. So it goes up through all that area. I'm not going to scroll back up all through all that. Undocumented instructions, and that's the other area that the undocumented PC focused on. Did manufacturers add any undocumented instructions, things that weren't identified? And this, for this being a standard 46 level CPU, and it goes through and test even those that by the determination of what the CPU is, of what hidden instructions it should support, and shows even the mnemonic for that in machine code, and basically describes. And in the book, he goes over the very good descriptions of what these can be. Set AL to the carry. Whatever's in the carry bit, whether it's set or cleared, set that across all the bits of the AL register. And some of this can be used for determining what level of CPU is on the system as well. System platform. It's a system type. It's a microchannel architecture. And a Phoenix BIOS, as we've learned through the splash screens at startup. The date, 1st of February 1993. And that's good for showing the date that way. And I've preferred to do that just so you don't get the month and the day confused and some of that setup. And then that the BIOS has no LBA support for disks, that long block addressing that allows you to use a bigger drive than that 512 megabyte, 504 megabyte, whatever it is. Diskette A, 1.44. And then hard drive 0, unknown controller type, and that's just because that's that NCR SCSI that is not necessarily enough known about for the way that they do those things, and listing the size of that drive, the composition of it. this what's called the CHS cylinders, head, sectors, and then video adapter. It's SVGA of ultimately what that video. And we saw those 4 VRAM chips and probably has some nice quantity of VRAM, and then it's got an NCR chip for that video. It does even have those drivers at least loaded for Windows and things like that. But then it looks like it has that resident driver of the VESA BIOS to support the display adapter as well. So we will step back. View CMOS RAM contents, and this is very interesting as well for a lot of this. And I've gone over this briefly in another video to show one factor, and also we'll look for it here. So just that even on the contents of that real-time clock chip, that Dallas module, of what it stores away for being the replacement of the Motorola chip for its time that handled that real-time clock and configuration information from the IBM AT. I'll scroll through this rather slowly just to have people where they can pause if they so desire. And we are going to get to this area where we're going to pause. And offset 32 hex is identified. It has the contents of 8E again, identified as the date century byte, MCA, checksum low. And this is a microchannel system, but remember, even for the ISA models of PS2s, IBM remapped that byte. It was formerly what's called the century byte, and actually remapped it to offset 37 hex. If we look down further, we see that 20 in there because it's 2021. So it's not really any mistake on that it covers the century now as compared to the year. Last year, 2020, it would have not been very obvious. Is that the year or is that the century? But that is the century byte location, that offset 37. So also as well, this NCR 3220 follows the IBM PS2 convention that they have the century byte in that offset 37 hex. That means that, there's not really necessarily any modern replacement to that DS 1387 chip that we saw. And I even had a question because I saw, and it's a chip I'm not familiar with, I saw somebody talk about replacing that DS 1387 with a 1487. And I don't know if a 1487 was that where it fixed that Y2K rollover aspect or what exactly to that. But if they don't have that century byte in there at that correct location, it's going to give likely throw off memory errors and things like that, because on the PS2s or those systems that where 32 hex is remapped, that's how it keeps track of the installed memory on the system. So, and we don't have any microchannel adapters in here. Going through some of the higher values, and it actually has values in there. These can be looked up. Now, CMOS RAM, because I was thinking, did I page down? No, because I thought at some point it was giving me the I thought it was giving me all the microchannel space as well. Oh, there we go. Why did it suddenly fire up for that aspect that we had to get out and get back in? Maybe just a little bug or not detecting that correctly. But after going through and going up to the top of that 7F, that full contents that would be in regular CMOS RAM, then we have this microchannel architecture, extended CMOS memory of 2 KB in size of what it stores away. And it looks like some of these values are filled. There's particular conventions to this of what data is stored in there. That CPU reset signature can be stored in there. The number of microchannel slots can be stored away in here. And then the 55AA is just a alternate bit. Settings typically mean that there's not any value that's held, legitimate value that's held in that. It just sets the bits alternately as ones or zeros as it goes through that register storage. Sometimes when that's the memory testing routine as well, of going through and setting and clearing alternate bits in memory just to see if they change like they're supposed to, that it's not where one is latched high or anything like that, or latched low. But let's scroll through that information as well. There may be something that's able to be picked off more later on for how that storage area is used. And like I say, we're talking about a system that doesn't have any microchannel adapters. Also, although some of those planar resources could also be a factor as well. I'm just watching the time. We're a little bit under 50 minutes of recording at this point. So all that 2 KB area, and we're getting now, it's just the AA55 or 55AA, whichever way you want to say it, alternating those bits in that structure. And I'm not thinking enough in hex on when we are going to. I mean, I could go through and I could start doing page up and page down just to. Okay, and that's where it stops. Oh yeah. Okay, so 800. Well, 8 and 3 zeros would be effectively in hexadecimal would be 2 KB in decimal. Parallel ports. A little bit more information than the set utility in this case. The parallel port and what the address is, if it's active, whether it's in extended mode as well. And then in that position 4, that's the extended BIOS data area segment that's stored in that area. There's not a whole bunch of systems that have 4 parallel ports on them. And then serial ports. And again, it's presenting that there are no serial ports installed in this. I just have to see if it's not detecting it for the format, or if it's a part of that setup routine that has to be done. Or maybe it's gone out, or what is actually the deal there, because I thought I saw a 25-pin serial port on the back of this unit. And that's all that is failing to work at this point. And their thought is there even could be jumper settings or something else that goes through and plays a part in that to enable it. Turn to main menu. Program summary list. just showing some of the things. And as I say, you can run these from the command line to go through. And, even some that aren't featured within this graphical interface, it might be interesting to people. The detection utilities. And all of this is covered in code very elaborately within the book. Highly recommended book. And I will be giving ISBN numbers again for these for the books, for people to search out and find those. Okay, and we're getting the beeps for the bottom of it. And it's been a while. I think I went through at one point and looked at the last minute notes and things like that just to kind of see what was going on. Back. View program sources. Oh, so this even goes through and you're able in this viewer to view the assembly language code that's included on the disk. Wow. And the thought is you could even cut paste. So, and I don't even think that was included on the first edition. It looks like he has some strings in here of what's displayed. This is assembly language, people. And see there, it's identifying between microchannel, extended CMOS memory, ESA. I want to figure out why it actually didn't display that microchannel CMOS. I knew that it would. Even the older edition of the book did for that program. See, check if microchannel has extended microchannel CMOS memory, and identified parentheses. MUL50 does not. And remember, I've talked about that MUL50 being a little bit of minimized microchannel, or not with some of the elements that were included on the higher end or later models. But this is going through and determining if the system has that information and probably trying to detect it. And who knows, stepping in and out seems like it caused the system to redetect it for some reason. May have some little bug that's going on there. See, check for ESIA. Display, and then here's all the stuff for displaying that CMOS information. So this book just has so much. I pressed escape once and it stepped me all the way out just to kind of look through all that assembly language programs that we saw earlier. And conversion routines and things like that. And this is how it detects all the different types of UARTs, that chip that runs the serial port. So all that, listings for all those assembly language. In fact, if you had the diskette, all the programs, the book would be maybe get to the point of almost being unneeded. But that book has just so much detail and has all that down in hard copy. Okay, using the undocumented PC programs. Just looks like a little bit of a license agreement. And like I said, you're not getting these files from me. You're not going to... I'm not going to release any of this stuff. You just have to get out there. You have to find a book with it. Who knows? I mean, if I'd even be willing, if the author, some way of an individual proving that they have the book, but not the associated diskette with it. Okay. And he shows how to go through and the so-called installation. And I did the same thing. I just created a directory on my hard drive, UNPC, and copy all the files over to that. That's what I did for the installation. And he shows how to go through if you've got the assembler stuff. The TASM is the turbo assembler from Borland. Microsoft's macro assembler, that's MASM, M-A-S-M. And then turning that into a, whether you have to turn that in, whether it's a COM executable or you make that into an exe file, a bigger, more segmented program. COM programs are limited to like a 64 KB segment size, single segment. So they have to be a little bit smaller, although 64 KB is quite a lot for doing things sometimes, and you can write some pretty good utilities within that space. But he goes through, it looks like even you're able to change colors and how it displays. VGA grayscale systems and all that. And people can pause, the video to kind of read a little bit more to all that. But very elaborate. Products from V Communications, which is the nature of, that's what this this book is aligned with. That's what they call that company. I don't know what the current status of, we're still in business or what else is going on in this day and age from being back. It looks like maybe mid to late 90s of when a lot of this was done. Assembly language tools that they sell. The Sorcerer, and I've even heard about, I think that was the primary program that I understood that they had, is that you ran Sorcerer over a compiled program and it disassembled it rather than going the other way of assembling the program. Disassemble it, reverse engineer, gave a little bit of look at that. The 132 column mode and things like that, that's pretty standard utilities out there. Assembly checker, bug finder. That's, some of those could be, does it give a little bit more detail? Wow. Let's look at the assembly flowcharter. Wow. Tree diagrams, CPU timing analysis. Wow. It might even be interesting to see if there's any leads for these programs of being relatively lower priced, because it's got to have taken a lot to make them. I think Sorcerer at the time, there was some pricey aspects to it. BIOS preprocessor for BIOS listings. I won't tell you the name that I'm thinking of right now. Somebody that might be very interested in some of the stuff if he's not aware of it otherwise. I wanted to look over the Sorcerer. Because as I say, and that would go through and even put comments of how it interpreted that assembly language code of what it was doing. and very just elaborate for all that. And I mean, in some cases it could fail, but it did a reasonable job. Zoomable file viewer, zoomable. I give all the specifications for that. Like I said, I wonder what this stuff even be interesting if it's been archived, and maybe this diskette has been archived somewhere as well by the author or the company that they have. But as far as I know, it is a that goes through and looks at some of the Windows programs and disassembler for Windows and OS2. That stuff could be handy. And then return to our previous menu. Consumer products. Boot Commander. System Commander. And they have that view it listed again. Easily select multiple OSs. So it's kind of a dual boot, or I want to see this for like a TSR that stays up on the screen. We looked at all that view it before. Here's that boot commander, just a single screen. Diffit, so interactive file difference viewer of that similar, that DOS file compare. The FC command that went through and you could compare two files, what the differences were and where the differences were as well within the files. I can't remember if I'll just leaf through that just to kind of show. There's a post about the Novell DOS 7 the other day that I saw. And so that does quite a bit. Wow. I'm just looking at time, and we're over an hour. We've kind of looked all through those. Anybody has, see something that they feel that I did not show well enough? I mean, I will take comments in the, wow, pretty elaborate. Just a presentation of showing, it's kind of selling you the Magic TSR, Terminate and Stay Resident Toolkit. So that would be for constructing the TSR programs. Wow, wow, wow. The professionals use it. As far as I was aware, the things like Sorcerer and the other products they had were some very neat things to have. And to assembly for speed, looks professional, the easy way. The most needed routines. And it's that's so-called power lib. And I think that the text on this is coming through well enough. Quality assurance tools, assembly checker, bug finder, and I think we already saw that. Automated software tester, test director, automate your testing. And there's got to be comments. People have got to have run across this in the past. Maybe they can elaborate if they ran some of these programs, used them, and how helpful they were. Okay, sample test tree. Open architecture. System commander. We already kind of looked through some of that. Some of these are kind of crossover products. Technical books. Okay, the Undocumented PC, which is the book that I'm showing here. I did have Undocumented DOS I've got to find where I've got that book tucked away somewhere. And kind of neat. Shows what Microsoft did going through in some of their code writing and the tests that they did to make sure it was authentic Microsoft DOS and whether that would run Windows or not. The Windows 3.x at the time that ran on top of the user interface that runs on top of DOS, and how valid that test was, whether it was truly needed that you had to have an authentic Microsoft DOS underneath that user interface. Undocumented Windows, I think I had that around, or it may have been the one book that I may have not. And DOS internals, I trying to think, I can't remember if I had that or not. And these are viewed as the Andrew Schulman series for. And you know what would have been really cool is if they had listed the ISBN within these as well. I don't know if it was that thought of at that point that they probably didn't realize the ease it would be at now to look up an ISBN and find a book within seconds on Amazon. But what does it say about this? Addison Wesley Publishing. Reading, Massachusetts. So that is the book that I'm talking about. V Communications ordering. Do you know the way to San Jose? Not only do you have to put up with my talking, you have to put up with my singing. But they have their address, got a phone number. So may call it. Find out if it's still in service. They're in a suite up in San Jose. Still probably pretty pricey real estate. So there's your price list. Them being in, and they even give a website. That might be worthwhile to go through and see if that website still exists. Yeah, I could do a browser capture. And that'd be the main thing of whether that company is alive anymore. I've not really, and back in the day, I may have visited that. I can't remember now. But we have a price list, and like I say, I'm thinking that's 1997 dollars. Maybe, I don't know what the time frame is at. And Sorcerer is not all that bad there. $150. These days I'd spend that for what I know the Sorcerer does. I'd spend it. BIOS preprocessor. That person I'm thinking about, $50 USD. And he's written utilities that go in there and do all that stuff for himself anyway, but he may be aware of that too. But I'll scroll down through the pricing list just to see. I was thinking that the highest one we're seeing is that ProPack 4. Oh, all the above. So you get all those things for $560. Just an odd pricing, $559.65. wonder if they even have electronic delivery for some of that stuff too. Now, software testers, quality assurance, those technical books. So this undocumented PC, I mean, it was viewed as being sold for that $45 USD back in the day. Shipping cost, call, prices in U.S. funds, prices subject to change without notice. California residents must add local sales tax. It has all the trademarks listed there. Wow. Neato. I don't know if I've ever looked at that before. Did we? Yeah, and then that's some of the background to V Communications. They give the example of System Commander and some of the blurbs, references, what people are saying about it. Just for that boot commander. Well, okay. They get into some of the other things, Gate and On Stage. Sorcerer, and they have one, Steve Gibson. Wow. So, guy that's still active online and still security now. That's from the kind of the twit angles. And by the way, I have met Leo Laporte in person and his wife, wonderful wife. It's been a few years now, but I have met him. I would have loved to meet Steve Gibson. The colleague I was there with would have loved to as well. With the reverence that we view Steve just as that knowledgeable source and talking about security and things like that. But one of those big names of what Steve Gibson said about Sorcerer. So we are at the main menu. Return to DOS. And we have gone on a very, very long time. It's going to probably wrap up to being close to an hour and 15 minutes. But that was a very good view into the starting with the NCR system and looking through that, and also largely reviewing that UNPC software contents of those programs and things like that. And we need to get some feedback. By all means, go through and try and check out that site. Try and look around for some of those products and just to see what the availability is for them now. And that could be very helpful to people out there, and me included. I would love to have some of that stuff of access to Sorcerer and be less inclined that I'd have to disassemble a program like SCSI Level, and that was very simplistic for me to go through and see what the program did. But have some more automated utilities that maybe do a little bit quicker, do a little bit better. Why reinvent the wheel? So, if you like this off-the-wall content, you love hearing my voice and my singing, go ahead and click on that like button or leave some feedback to telling me, am I able to carry a tune or not? And, yeah, like that content. Look at the links I provide. And it's great. Sometimes I need help with the support of the channel and the content, and allowing me to be more at peace and maybe be a little bit more relaxed to think of what I can do. If you have suggestions, give me feedback of what you'd like to see covered. I can make the try. I can at least give you a little bit of feedback myself to let you know on how possible something like that would be as well. But subscribe to my channel and pass it around. It's increasing. I realize with time I need to be patient. That's going to grow on its own. That's going to be relevant to the content I provide, what the channel has, to what people like subscribing to and seeing. But I'll try and do a good job and bring up that subscriber count. But after a very long video, this is IBM Museum. That's all I have for now. Thank you.